You know, there's some characters in the Capcom vs. games, and specifically the Marvel vs. games, that are just synonymous with the series. Sure, you have Ryu, Chun-Li, Morrigan, Captain America, Spider-Man, and Wolverine, but there's a tier above that reserved for characters that arguably define some of the most exciting, most hype, most degenerate and grimy stuff to ever come out of this series. Marvel 3 has Zero, Phoenix, and Virgil, to name a few. Capcom vs. SNK 2 has the absolute degeneracy of A-Groove Blanca and K-Groove Sagat. But the best known of all are the four gods of Marvel vs. Capcom 2: Magneto, Sentinel, Storm, and Cable. Cable is the son of Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, and Madeline Pryor, a clone of Jean Grey. Explaining her whole deal would be a video unto itself. Cable was born Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, with the middle names being taken from his grandfather Christopher Summers, also known as the spacefaring Corsair, leader of the Starjammers, and Charles Xavier, arguably the closest thing Cyclops had to a father figure in his formative years. As a baby, he was infected with a techno-organic virus that threatened to turn him entirely into a machine. To save him, he was sent into the future in the hopes that a cure would exist then, and that he could live his life. Cable inherited vast psionic powers from his mother, which manifested during his adolescence as it does with most mutants. This became key to him not succumbing to the virus. Cable uses his powers to hold the virus at bay and keep it from claiming more of his body, as one of his arms and eyes have already fallen victim to it. As an adult, he frequently time travels back into the past to assist the X-Men, on top of having awkward reunions with his extended family. As a comic book enjoyer myself, I can tell you that Summers' family tree gets pretty damn wild. Cable was voiced by Lawrence Bain in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, reprising his role from X-Men the Animated Series.
Who are you? The Wild Man of Borneo. See you around.
Incidentally, Bain also voices the announcer for Marvel 2, though he's uncredited in-game.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. New Age of Heroes.
Cable was also one of the few new Marvel characters added to the game, and is arguably the headlining Marvel character opposite Ruby Hart on the Capcom side. According to the development team, Cable was chosen for the roster as he was considered to be pretty popular among American comic book fans. They had apparently deliberately put off including him in previous entries because they weren't sure how to go about implementing such a gun-centric character, but they figured they'd give it a shot for Marvel 2. His design is more or less a faithful sprite adaptation of his design in the comics from the mid to late 90s. Now, every fighting game has their top tiers, and let's be real, if winning is what you want to do, you should probably pick them. Cable in particular, though, is perhaps the most interesting of the four MVC2 gods. Storm is arguably the best runaway character in the game, Magneto the best rushdown character, and Sentinel is a big body with absurd damage and mobility rivaling that of the aforementioned characters thanks to his unfly glitch. Cable, however, has pretty awful mobility. In fact, even Dan arguably has slightly better mobility. So what makes Cable so dangerous then? Well, let's get into it. Cable is Marvel 2's premier keep-away character. I mentioned earlier that Cable has a bunch of psychic abilities at his disposal in the comics, but that's just one of the things he's known for. The other thing he's known for is guns. Lots and lots of guns. The vast majority of Cable's moveset in this game focuses on that aspect of the character, and to Capcom's credit, they did a pretty respectable job. Backed up with the right assists, the good Cable player could be nigh impossible to get in on without being chipped to death. Cable has one unique command normal, a kick attack done with forward and heavy kick. It's kind of useless, but hey, it's there. Speaking of unique normals though, Cable's standing heavy punch is worth talking about here as he uses his pistol for every variation of this button. If done while standing, he can fire a single shot, and more if you mash the button. In the air, he fires a single shot, and if he does a crouching heavy, he swings the gun up to hit you while firing a shot that sends you right back down to the ground. The grounded version can also be hit confirmed into special moves and hyper combos. Remember that jumping heavy punch in particular because we're going to be going back to that a bit later. Also, if you land the standing version and let Cable idle, he holds this really cool pose with his back to the screen. Almost looks like he's posing for a comic book cover. Cable's first special move is Viper Beam, done with a quarter circle forward and punch. This is a full screen multi-hitting projectile attack that can also be done in the air. The grounded version is unsafe on block, but the aerial version is a bit better in those regards. Cable can slightly angle the beam either upwards or downwards by holding either up or down. As well known as his Viper Beam attacks are in this game, they actually seem to be generic plasma weapons Capcom designed for this game, in the style of the kinds of heavy weaponry he tended to use in the X-Force comics, as well as his solo series in the 1990s. His second special move is Scimitar, done with a Dragon Punch motion in any punch. This is a multi-hitting anti-air attack with some decent startup and vulnerability. Unlike Viper Beam, this attack actually does have some origins in the comics. It first appeared in issue number 58 of Cable's solo series. The Scimitar is an ancient weapon said to help focus the powers of any telekinetic that wields it. This would become a recurring part of Cable's arsenal from that point forward, though he'd lend it out on occasion, like to Deadpool for example. His third special move is Crackdown, done with a quarter circle forward and kick. Cable rushes forward with an overhead strike and sends out what appears to be a psionic projectile that travels a short distance. This move looks cool, but in all honesty, it really isn't all that practical. His fourth move is a leg trap, done with a quarter circle back and kick. Cable throws a grenade which explodes and briefly holds an opponent in place if not blocked. By holding the kick button while the grenade is out, you can actually delay the detonation of the grenade, very similarly to how Jill can do the same with her shotgun attack in the game. These are a great zoning tool, and switching up your timing of the detonations are a great way to keep your opponent guessing during your zoning offense. Cable's next special move is Side Charge, done with a half circle back and punch. Despite it looking like one, this actually isn't a command grab and can be blocked pretty easily. This also isn't a great attack. If you land it, he does strike a pretty cool pose if you don't press anything though. I mean, you know, that's neat. Don't use this move. Getting in the hyper combos now, the first move we'll talk about is Time Flip, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 kicks.
Time Flip.
Cable summons a clone that does an auto combo if not blocked, while you're free to move around as you please. Bear in mind that you can't call any assists or use any hyper combos while this super is active. It should be noted that Cable has the ability to project realistic looking and feeling illusions to others with his telepathy in the comics. I may be reaching, but this definitely looks to be borrowing a bit from that power set. Next up is Cable's Hyper Viper Beam, done with quarter circle forward and 2 punches. This is undoubtedly Cable's most recognizable attack in the game.
Wonderful.
You can direct the trajectory of the beam by holding up or down during the super and can mash buttons for more hits. But if we're talking about Cable, then there's one aspect of his moveset that we absolutely need to talk about. Air Hyper Viper Beam is the best super in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, bar none. This single move elevates Cable from a decent keep away character to being one of the 4 best characters in the game. Why? You got a minute? Standard Hyper Viper Beam has a 20 frame startup, which is about right for that kind of beam super. Air Hyper Viper Beam, on the other hand, is active on frame 2. I cannot underline enough how absurd of a punish tool it becomes as a result of this. Opponent did something punishable? I mean, shit, you want to punish someone's hyper combo on reaction?
I'm ready.
If you have Cable on your team using his Scimitar assist, you can crossover counter into it and immediately cancel it into an Air Hyper Viper Beam, meaning that your entire team technically gets access to an Air Hyper Viper Beam as a punish. Remember when I said we'd come back to that jumping heavy punch? Yeah. Cable can perform an unblockable guard break setup on incoming opponents after a teammate KO or even after a snapback by using it in conjunction with their Hyper Viper Beam. Just before your opponent comes in the frame, jump up and fire off a jumping heavy punch at the height that your opponent will come in at. By the time you land, they should be incoming and blocking the shot. Wait a split second for your opponent to go into the fall animation after blocking it, and immediately use Air Hyper Viper Beam. This is unblockable, so even if your opponent was guarding, they'll be hit by this. All of those things are pretty ridiculous as it is, but there's one last cherry on top of things. Air Hyper Viper Beam's biggest claim to fame is its ability to be looped for as long as Cable has meter. By performing a Tiger Knee motion, which is essentially a quarter circle forward, but instead of ending the motion at forward, you end at up forward instead, you can do an Air Hyper Viper Beam incredibly close to the ground. This is important because Air Hyper Viper Beam recovers incredibly fast, especially the lower to the ground you are. So the idea is to continuously chain these Tiger Knee Air Hyper Viper Beams for as much meter as you have. Do keep in mind that for the first Hyper Viper Beam, you want to be aiming it downwards, and for the second one, aim it upwards instead. The value of Cable having the ability to essentially delete a character off of a good reaction to a whiffed attack cannot be emphasized enough. Air Hyper Viper Beam is an omnipresent threat hovering over any match involving him. And the scariest part is that the crossover counter and the guard break I mentioned earlier, they can 100% set up for the loops. If you want to learn how to play Cable, it's imperative that you learn this loop. It's what makes Cable such a force to be reckoned with, and the craziest thing about it is that it's honestly pretty easy to learn. I'm only kind of okay at fighting games on a competitive level, and it only took me like 15 minutes to learn it. Speaking of learning about Cable, this video's comic book recommendation is not one, not two, but 3 stories. I'll explain. There's definitely a few great comic book runs for Cable out there, but I think one of the best and easiest to digest that he's been involved with is the Messiah trilogy from the X-Men books. This was a trilogy of story arcs beginning with Messiah Complex, leading into Messiah War, and ending with Second Coming. It starts sometime after M-Day, the day Scarlet Witch depowered over 90% of the war's mutants. A new mutant has against all odds been born, but there's some conflict. Cable gets involved because in his future timeline, the baby grows up to be one of mutant kind's saviors. But in the parallel future timeline of fellow time traveler Bishop, this baby actually marks the beginning of the end. This sets off a chain of events leading to Cable protecting and raising the child. It's one of the better X-Men stories of that era and a fantastic era for Cable in particular, as he gets some of his best character development in this trilogy, particularly in Second Coming. It's also one of the few X-Men stories you can kind of just jump into without having to understand the massive X-Men canon. I'm pretty sure all of it is available to read on Marvel Unlimited and has been collected in trade, so definitely give it a read if you want one of the best takes on Cable. Cable's projectile assist is Viper Beam.
I'm ready.
His anti-air assist is Scimitar.
I'm ready.
His final assist is Electrap.
I'm ready.
Here are all of Cable's colors. Cable is in a lot of ways emblematic of the spirit of the Versus games. He has a cool design, he embodies all of the scummy cheap stuff the series is known for, has some of the most quotable lines, and honestly, probably one of the first characters you think of when you think of Marvel 2. Not to say that current fighting game character design is bad or anything, but Cable really is one of those characters where you just look at everything he can do and all you can say is damn. They really don't make him like they used to. Marvel 2 ended up being his only playable appearance in the series, but there's a few nods to him in Marvel 3. He shows up on the giant Days of Future Past poster, as well as being present on the character select key art in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Deadpool's alternate costume is essentially him cosplaying as Cable, and even gets a new line acknowledging this.
You thought Cable wasn't in this game.
That's going to do it for this episode. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Do you have any fond memories of Marvel 2 or Cable specifically? I'd like to hear them in the comment section if you do. Everyone take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.